Do you ever listen to an ambient or chill track and get really inspired to make your own, and you sit down and look out the window, gazing back on all that could have been, reflecting on the impermanence of it all, and you roll up your sleeves and you press your nihilistic fingers against the keys and you get a sound like this? Do you wonder how to get those rich, lush, atmospheric sound beds that other artists use that seem to transport you to another dimension? Do you question the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, and wish to express your assorted existential crises musically? Do you sometimes forget to wipe? These are all important questions, and if you answered yes to any of the above, then boy are you in for a treat, because today I'm going to teach you how to make sounds like this out of only a handful of elements you probably have sitting around right now. Good morning, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee with Cameron. And as you probably guessed, in this video we're going to focus on making big, lush, ambient droning soundscapes that you can use to kickstart your next ambient track or use as an intro or breakdown or whatever you would like. The only real requirement to follow along with this tutorial is that you have a granular synth of some kind. I will be using Arturia Pigments 2 and its granular engine, but that's not required to do this. All you need is some kind of granular synth. You could use Reason Grain, Omnisphere, UVI Falcon, Quanta, the Mangle, Pad Shop, Granulator, or Fruity Granulizer, or anything else that offers some kind of granular synthesis mode. If you don't have any kind of granular synthesizer, unfortunately I couldn't find one that was free that I can honestly recommend. I found a lot of them just didn't really sound great or were very hard to use. However, a couple substitutes that are really easy to get a hold of are Audacity, because it includes a version of Paul Stretch, or get the full version of Paul Stretch itself. You can get very similar results using those. If you know a decent free granular synth VST, feel free to leave that down in the comments below, because I'm sure that would help a lot of people out, myself included, because like I said, I tested out a few and I couldn't really find anything I thought was decent that I could honestly recommend. As I mentioned, I will be using Pigments 2 in this video because I think it has a really good interface, so it's easy to translate these settings into other synths, but Pigments also offers a couple unique things like some fun unison modes and a couple other things that I'll be utilizing just for a bit of a different character. But otherwise, as long as you have a granular synth, a nice reverb, and some kind of wavetable or subtractive synth to layer it with, that's all you need to do this. If the tips in this video helped you make a cool track, feel free to share it to me on social media or in my Discord, because I'm always excited to hear what you guys create. And if you're ready to share your track with the world, why not check out my friends over at DistroKid? I've personally been using DistroKid myself to distribute my music for years, and it's about as easy as it gets. DistroKid makes it incredibly straightforward to distribute your music to all the major retailers in the known universe in only a handful of clicks. For only $20 a year, you can upload unlimited songs, so even when you're really grinding out tracks, you can upload all of them without any worries or any extra fees, and you keep 100% of your earnings. DistroKid goes beyond just regular distribution because you can also maximize your revenue by getting your music placed in the Content ID system. You can get a verified Spotify profile, and they can also help you get an official verified YouTube artist account, which is pretty neat. To get started with DistroKid and save 7% off your first year, you can use my referral link, which is distrokid.com/VIP/Venus Theory, and you can click the link down in the description below. I get a small kickback as well, so it's a great way to get your music out there and help support the channel so I can make more videos like this one. So get your reverbs ready, top off your coffee, and let's hop into the DAW and get started. So here we have the final patch, and there's quite a bit going on, but in this video I'm going to be breaking this down into more or less a formula. So once you understand the process and the workflow, and maybe save this whole thing as like a template in your DAW, you can make these huge atmospheric sound beds in like 5 minutes. Let's take a listen to the final sound here, and then we're going to crack open a new Pigments and start this whole process from the ground up. In order to get the ball rolling, we're going to need to start off by designing the initial thing we're going to feed into the granular synth, and this can be just about any sound. I use pianos a lot, or guitar sounds, or world instruments. It can really be any sound you want. There are just a couple of rules to this initial thing to keep in mind that I find give the best results. In this example, I'm going to be using a piano here. This is Arturia Piano V. This is one of my presets. This is just a really soft, mellow piano sound. So this gives us a nice kind of rounded thing that's not going to be too obtrusive. You know, this is a background element. It doesn't need to be super bright and big and exciting. It just needs to fill out a lot of space and provide that atmospheric vibe and the world for the track to sit in. Once you've selected your initial sound, whatever that might be, we're going to kick things off by adding a new audio track here, and then we're going to route that instrument into this audio track. So I'm going to route the output of Piano V to the input of this audio track. If you are in Ableton, you can do this with the resampling mode on a track. If you are in FL, you can use Edison. Otherwise, just do what I'm about to do and bounce that file out and then bring it back in. Now that we've got our piano sound set up here, what we're going to do is just let this run and record some stuff. We're not really going to worry about playing in a certain tempo or anything like that, but there are a couple of little footnotes I think are important to get the best results. The biggest thing I find is playing not too many notes and not making everything too short. We want long, sustained notes that kind of run together and create this big kind of washy thing, and I typically do this always in the key of C. The reason for this is I can save these materials for later and just put them in a folder of like things I can put in a granular synth and get a cool pad out of. This way I always know that it's in C. I'm not guessing what key I made this thing in. When it comes to the actual notes you should play, I find using the root and the fifth is a really good result because that means it's going to translate to any key a lot better. You can also use the minor third, maybe not. Otherwise, relying on the root, the fifth, and then the second and fourth degrees of the scale usually provides pretty good results. If you're not really sure what I'm talking about and don't know much about music theory, you can pause this video and go over to musictheory.net. It's a free website with a bunch of resources to learn the basics of music theory. There's a lesson on scales and scale degrees that should take you about 5 or 10 minutes, and then you can come back and get started with this whole process. One last piece of advice before we begin this process is to add maybe just a couple different effects to this sound. I'm going to use an untimed delay, so I'm just going to set this to free mode, have a bit of feedback, maybe filter it and do some other stuff to it, and then maybe we could add like a quick little reverb of some kind. Let's add a dragonfly hall reverb and make it about 4 seconds. This way we're just getting something that's maybe a bit more interesting than just a standard piano sound. Now that we've got this all set up and out of the way, let's record a little bit, play a couple notes, and then we're going to use that as the basis for this entire droning thing. Cool, so now we've got that done and it's really quiet, so we can just go in here and boost up the volume of this clip a little bit, maybe add a gain utility of some kind to boost it up even further, and we should have something that's just kind of some droning piano notes. Turn it up a bit more. Sick. And that's really all we need to do. As you could hear, I was just mostly playing C and then G and a little bit of D, a little bit of F. So I was focusing on the root, the fifth, the second, and the fourth. This way I'm not using the third because this makes the whole thing a bit more tonally ambiguous. So it'll end up working in a major or minor key. If you know that you're mostly going to write in minor, feel free to include the minor third. But do keep in mind that as you translate this or move the pad around, it's not going to really change in key exactly. But otherwise, just use like the root and the fifth, play it a couple times for 30 seconds or so, and that's really all you need. Now that we're done, we don't need this piano anymore, so we can ditch that, and we're just going to trim this file up. I'm going to get rid of all that silence at the beginning, right about there, and get rid of all this stuff at the end we don't need. Now we're going to bounce this clip, post fader, so I'm just going to bounce this with that gain and all that stuff on it. Now that I've bounced this out, we have this loop here with no blank space on the beginning or end, and that's all we need to throw this into Pigments and get started. So we've got a nice fresh Pigments here. Let's change the engine 1 of Wavetable to sample. Then we're going to drag in our trimmed up piano loop here and enable granular mode. Feel free to experiment with these settings, but I'm going to show you what I generally do that gives pretty good results. So first off, I'm going to leave the shape as triangle. You could change the shape to be more of a ramp wave that can give you some more kind of sprinkly, transient-y grains, but in this case we just want something nice and smooth and mellow, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now we're going to up our density here, and then we're going to add some randomness to the density. Then we're going to randomize the size a little bit here. We can adjust the width to be even wider, and then we're going to crank up this start here. Now, what cranking up the start is doing there is not changing the starting point, but rather randomizing where the grains are coming from. So within this sample, it's just going to start from some random spot. This way we get this tonal cloud of notes. It's not starting from the same exact point every time. Now that we've got this done, we could up the size to maybe about 400 or 500 milliseconds. Make sure everything just has a little bit of randomness. The pitch randomness, don't go too crazy on, but adding a little bit just can add some interest and movement. Other than that, maybe drop the limit down to 64. I find 64 gives pretty good result. 128 can get a little intense and washy. Now that we've got all this set up, the only other thing to know is that if you recorded this in a different key, maybe you played around in A, you might need to go in here to the Edit tab and change the root note. In this case, it's in C, so we're going to leave it at C and give this a play and see what we've got. In this case, it's got a lot of low-end information we really don't need, so we're going to use this filter here and go more towards the high pass and just roll this up to the point where we get rid of a lot of that low mud we don't really need. Next up, we'll go over here to Empty Effects, change this to Unison, and we'll up this to 2 voices and set the detuning really low and maybe increase the stereo spread. This way we're just going to get an even more wide, epic sound, and this is what we end up with so far. Cool, so we're well on our way to a decent result. Now let's move into Engine 2, and we're going to enable this and set the mode to Wavetable. Since we've got this big washy granular thing, a bit of the problem with this is that it doesn't really have a stable droning center. So by adding a wavetable oscillator, we're going to get that nice wavetable-y movement to the sound, but it'll also drone out and hold a single note, which just ends up tonally stabilizing the entire result. From here, you can just scroll through and find something nice. I think maybe we'll go with additive thin or additive twin, why not? This is going to be a bit tricky, so you're going to need to blend this in against the granular stuff to find the point where it just rounds everything off. So we'll go up here to the output, drop the volume all the way down, and just bring this in slowly as we hold out a single note. Pigments makes it really easy to add a lot of modulation, so we're going to start off by going to, let's start with the LFO 1 here. Then we're going to up the position, and we'll go into LFO, change the mode to unipolar, change the rate to hertz, and drop this to something very, very slow. Maybe we'll change the range of modulation, because that might be a bit intense. And now let's play this again and see what we've got. To add a bit more movement and interest to this, we'll go over to the Random tab and we'll assign Random 1 to the wave folding and phase distortion. We don't want to do too much, just a little tiny bit. Then we're going to change the mode to sample and hold and increase the rise and fall times. This creates a slow, subtle drifting modulation. This just ends up adding even more movement to this wavetable than was already there before. So let's give this a play now and see what we've got. This wavetable gets kind of high in pitch, so let's drop the chorus tuning down an octave, and that way we have a nice low droning center for this whole thing. Now, we need to add a couple more things here just to make this a bit more moving and interesting. So let's start off by utilizing the filter here. And then we'll go to MW, which is mod wheel. Then we can assign our mod wheel to the filter cutoff. And here in the Unison, we'll up the voices as well when we increase the mod wheel. One of the cool things about the Unison and Pigments is it has a couple modes, and we can use chord and change the chord to 5th. So what this means is as I move my mod wheel up, the filter's going to open, but we're going to get a chord coming out of the wavetable as well with a couple different voices, which is pretty neat. And let's increase the stereo here, drop our mod wheel down, give this another play, and take a listen to how this morphs when I move my mod wheel. Let's adjust our mod wheel a bit here. Let's adjust the voices and maybe increase the filter cutoff to go up all the way, and maybe add a touch of resonance as well. The thing with pads is you want stuff that just has a lot of movement to it. You don't want just one static thing, so adding as much modulation as you can is a good idea. Next up, let's go to our envelopes tab here and go to this first envelope, which is our VCA, which is controlling the volume. Let's increase the attack to be relatively long and increase the release. This gives us more of a classic pad sound that has a bit of rise and release to it. That way it's not just instantly on and then instantly off, because that sounds a bit kind of boring. To add a bit more interest here, let's go back to the random and we'll use random 2 in sample and hold mode. We'll increase the rise and fall, set the rate to hertz, and something pretty slow right about there should be good. Let's go to random 2 and assign this to the sample and grain start and have this just scrubbing all the way through as much as we can. Maybe start it in the middle since it's bipolar. This way it's scrubbing through this entire granular sample the whole time. Because it's scrubbing through here and the grains are starting randomly, this just adds even more movement and interest to the sound. Finally, let's go in here and maybe add another filter. We'll just go to multi-mode and try something like maybe a notch. Set the cutoff somewhere. We'll go to random, sample and hold, increase the rise and fall, set the rate to hertz, and find something slow-ish. Go to random 3 and assign this to the cutoff. This is just going to add some movement to the pad. I think that is not totally necessary, but again, it just provides more movement and modulation so it doesn't ever really sound static or repetitive at any point. Now that we've got all this done, we can go into our effects tab and maybe add just a few quick things. I find a little bit of overdrive, just a tiny bit can be nice. And then maybe we could throw on a nice chorus with the rate very, 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 very slow. Now let's play this sound and take a listen to where we're at. So maybe the chorus here is a bit excessive, and this filter maybe isn't going to work out in this case. But that's sounding pretty cool, I think. That's really all there is to the synth part of this. Now comes adding some post-processing to this sound that really finalizes it and makes it more interesting. To begin the processing chain, I find it's good to start off with some kind of warbling thing. I like Bad Tape from Denise here. Let's add a little bit of harm, drop the hiss, and drop the wow, and shake to something very, very low. And this is just going to add that kind of drifting, warbly tape movement to the sound that just creates a bit more character. The color here is just going to darken the sound a little bit overall. Now that we've got that, we can add an untimed delay. Let's use another comeback kid. We'll set this to free mode, increase this to something relatively long, drop the feedback, make it stereo, filter this out. We can go to cheap mode and add some tape and swirl. We'll enable destiny, drop the wet, and then we're just going to find a really nice, super big reverb. My favorite, of course, is CLOUDSEED. So what I like to do is create a reverb that's relatively long, maybe 10 to 20 seconds, and then just get rid of the dry output. So I'm mixing this 100% wet. And once you do that, that's really where the magic happens. That took what we had earlier from, a pretty solid pad sound into this. Another really great reverb is the Dragonfly Hall reverb. I just upped the decay to about 8 seconds, maybe increase the late level slightly, and that gives you something more like this. As you can hear, different reverbs have a pretty tremendous impact on the final result, so experimenting with a couple different reverbs to find what sounds the best is really time well spent, because different reverb algorithms can add a totally different flavor and vibe to this kind of granular texture thing. Finally, to finish things off, I find an EQ is usually a good step, so we're just going to hold out a note here and just EQ based around that. So once we have our drone, we'll play the root of our song, or maybe a quick chord like a root and a fifth or something, and then we're going to EQ based on that just so we have a drone that's going to fit and not overwhelm the mix. And that's pretty much all there is to it. From here, you could layer this with some ambient recordings of walking around outside, or you could add more effects like some lo-fi effects, or a bit crusher, or any number of things just to add a bit more texture and interest to this. But this is the core idea, and as you can see, it's really, really straightforward to do. Once you understand these steps, you can knock this out, like I said, in like 5 minutes and make these huge droning things. And that wraps everything up for this video. So as always, thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys again soon.